Chapter 1: The Buzzing Vacancy. The sun hammered the roof of the sedan. Inside, the air was a thick, cooked soup. Marcus Cole gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white peaks in the landscape of his hands. The engine had given its final, shuddering cough 10 miles ago. Now a profound silence pressed in, broken only by the rhythmic tick of cooling metal. He had tried the phone. A useless brick. No bars, nothing. He pushed the door open. A wave of heat, solid as a physical blow, struck him. The asphalt shimmered, distorting the endless stretch of cracked road ahead. Behind him, the road was the same. A line drawn through a world of baked sand and skeletal shrubs. His car, a dark blister on the pale earth, was already a memory. He had a half-empty bottle of water. His briefcase contained files on a girl named Sarah, a stack of papers useless against dehydration. He chose a direction and began to walk. The sun was a merciless eye. Sweat pasted his shirt to his skin. His throat grew rough, a passage lined with sandpaper. Each breath was a sip of fire. The desert offered no shelter. It was an anvil, and he was the metal being beaten thin. Hours bled into one another. The sun slid across the sky. The horizon began to glow with the soft pastels of dusk. It was a beautiful, mocking death sentence. Then he saw it. Not a mirage. It was too ugly for a mirage. A flicker of angry pink and green against the deepening purple of the sky. A sign. As he trudged closer, the shape resolved itself. Two words, one above the other in buzzing neon tubes. Midway Motel. Vacancy. The O in motel sputtered, a failing insect. The sign cast a sickly, bruised light over a low, L-shaped building. A dozen doors faced a parking lot of cracked concrete sprouting defiant weeds. A separate, smaller building stood near the road, its window proclaiming office. An empty swimming pool, a pale blue rectangle, gaped like a wound in the earth. The place was an island of decay in an ocean of nothing. It was also his only chance. The gravel of the parking lot crunched under his worn shoes. The air here was different, heavy. The buzzing of the sign was a physical presence, a hum he could almost taste, like old electricity and rust. He pushed the office door. A small bell, coated in dust, announced his arrival with a dull thud. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, pine-scented cleaner, and something else. Something sweet and cloying, like old flowers left to rot in their vase. A woman stood behind the counter. She was old, but her age was impossible to pin down. Her hair, a perfect silver helmet, seemed sculpted from spun glass. Her face was a web of fine wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She wore a floral dress, buttoned to the collar. A smile, fixed and serene, sat on her lips. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was smooth, like honey poured over gravel. "A weary traveler. We don't get many of those on foot." "My car broke down," Marcus said. His own voice was a croak. He cleared his throat. "Engine block cracked, I think, miles from here." "Oh, the poor dear. This old road can be so cruel." The woman's smile did not waver. "Well, you have found a sanctuary. I am Maud. Welcome to the Midway." "I need a room," Marcus said, "and a phone." "We can certainly provide a room. The phone, I am afraid, is another story. The lines went down in a storm last week. The company is so slow to send anyone out this far." She sighed, a delicate, practiced sound of regret. "One room, then." "Yes, please." She slid a leather-bound guest book across the counter. It was heavy, its corners protected by tarnished brass. "If you would be so kind." Marcus opened it. A wave of dizziness washed over him. The names were written in a variety of hands, a history of desperation. The last entry was dated 2 weeks prior. He found a blank line and scrawled his name. As his pen touched the paper, the cloying, sweet smell in the room intensified. For a moment he thought he heard a whisper, a faint sigh that was not Maud's. He shook his head, blaming the heat. A loud noise from a back room made him jump. A man filled the doorway. He was enormous, a slab of muscle and sweat stuffed into a dirty tank top and overalls. His face was puffy, his eyes small and mean. He held a wrench in one hand, its metal head dark with grease. "What is it?" the man grunted. His voice was a wet, guttural thing. "A guest, Waylon dear," Maud said, her tone never changing. "A gentleman whose vehicle has failed him." Waylon's small eyes scanned Marcus from head to toe. It was not a glance, it was an appraisal. The kind a butcher gives a side of beef. He grunted again, a sound of dismissal, and turned his attention to a spot on the wall behind Marcus, his gaze fixed on nothing. "Waylon helps me with the upkeep," Maud explained, as if her son were not standing right there. "He is a tireless worker." She pulled a key from a hook on the wall. The key was attached to a large, diamond-shaped plastic tag with the number 7 painted on it. "Room 7 for you, sir, right in the middle. A lovely view of the pool." Marcus took the key. The plastic was smooth and greasy. "How much?" "Oh, let us not worry about that now," Maud chirped. "You get yourself settled, have a nice, long rest. We can sort out the financials in the morning. We are not going anywhere." The promise sounded less like a comfort and more like a threat. Marcus nodded, his throat too dry for more words. He wanted water. He wanted a lockable door between him and this strange pair. He stepped outside. The desert air was cooler now, but the oppressive weight of the motel remained. He walked along the concrete path, his footsteps loud in the quiet. He passed room 5, its curtains drawn, room 6 the same. Then he reached his door. The wood was faded, the paint peeling. He slid the key into the lock. It turned with a rusty scream. The room was basic. A bed with a thin, patterned bedspread. A small wooden table with a single chair. A lamp with a yellowed, water-stained shade. A door on the far wall presumably led to a bathroom. The air was thick with the scent of dust and disinfectant. A large, dark stain marred the ceiling, a misshapen continent on a sea of cracked plaster. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and went straight to the bathroom. He twisted the faucet. A groan echoed from the pipes, followed by a spurt of brown water. He let it run. After a minute, it cleared. The water was lukewarm and tasted of metal, but it was wet. He drank deeply, cupping his hands, letting the liquid scour the dust from his throat. He splashed his face, the cool shock a welcome sensation. He looked up into the mirror of the medicine cabinet. It was fogged from the water. He wiped it with his hand. For a split second he saw a face behind his own. A man's face, thin and pale, wearing a red cap. The eyes were wide with a silent, pleading terror. Then it was gone. His own tired, sunburnt reflection stared back at him. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. A hallucination. The heat, the dehydration, it had to be. He stared at his own reflection, waiting for it to change, but it remained stubbornly his. He took a deep, steadying breath. He was a man who dealt in broken minds, in people who saw things that were not there. He knew the tricks the brain could play. He walked out of the bathroom, leaving the light on. The single bulb in the main room cast long, distorted shadows. He sat on the edge of the bed. The springs complained. He looked at the door. The lock was a simple deadbolt, the kind that could be opened with a credit card. He wedged the back of the wooden chair under the knob. It was not much, but it was something. Sleep was a distant country. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the window pane was an intruder. He lay on top of the covers, his clothes still on. He listened. The buzzing of the sign outside was a constant, maddening drone. He heard footsteps on the gravel, heavy, slow footsteps. Waylon doing his rounds. The steps paused outside his door. Marcus held his breath. A shadow blotted out the light under the door. A full minute passed. Then the footsteps moved on. Later, much later, as he drifted in the gray space between waking and sleeping, he heard a new sound. It was faint at first from somewhere down the walkway. A rhythmic clatter, click, clack, clack, click. It was the sound of a child's game, the sound of jacks being played on the concrete. It went on for a long time, a tiny, methodical sound in the vast, empty desert. Marcus opened his eyes. The room was dark. The neon glow from outside painted a faint, sickly stripe across the far wall. He was not alone. The feeling was as solid and certain as the lumpy mattress beneath him. He did not move. He did not breathe. He scanned the shadows. There was nothing, just the cheap furniture and the stain on the ceiling. Yet the presence remained. A cold spot in the air, a pressure against his ears. He saw the door to his room. The chair was still wedged under the knob, but the deadbolt, the simple lock he had turned hours ago, was now unlocked. He sat up, his body rigid. The movement was a betrayal, a signal to whatever shared the room with him. Nothing happened. The silence stretched. He slid his legs off the bed, his feet finding the cold, gritty floor. He moved toward the door, one slow step at a time. He reached it. He wrapped his hand around the knob. He turned it. He pulled the door open and stepped out into the neon-lit night. The motel was quiet. The clacking sound was gone. The parking lot was empty. He looked down the walkway. The doors were all closed. Then he saw room 13. He had not noticed it before. There was no room 13. The numbers went from 12 straight to 14. But here, between room 12 and the corner of the building, was a door. It was different from the others. It was made of heavy, dark wood, not the cheap, painted pine of the other rooms. There was no number on it. Instead, a heavy iron padlock secured a thick hasp. The door looked ancient, out of place. It looked like a seal on a tomb. As he watched, he saw Waylon emerge from the office. The big man moved with a strange, shuffling gait. He did not seem to see Marcus. He walked to the padlocked door. He reached out a thick-fingered hand and touched the padlock, a gesture that was almost a caress, a strange mix of reverence and fear. He stood there for a long time, his head bowed, as if listening to something on the other side. Then he turned and shuffled away, disappearing around the back of the building. Marcus retreated into his room. He locked the door again, his hands trembling. He did not bother with the chair this time. He knew it was useless. The Midway Motel was not a place of physical locks. It was a place of rules he did not understand. and he had a terrible, sinking certainty that by signing the guest book, he had already agreed to play by them. He sat on the bed, his back against the wall, and waited for the dawn. He knew he would not sleep again. Chapter 2. The Static Guests. Morning came not with a sunrise, but with a slow dilution of the darkness. The neon sign outside flickered and died, its absence leaving a silence that was louder than its hum. Marcus's eyes were gritty, his mind a dull, aching machine. He had spent the night cataloging every sound, every shift in the shadows. Nothing had happened. The presence in his room had faded with the light, a ghost of a memory. He needed a plan. The car was a lost cause. The phone was dead. Maud and Waylon were not hosts, they were wardens. His only option was to walk, but the thought of the sun-blasted road made his throat tighten. First, he needed information. He needed to understand the geography of his prison. He left his room. The desert air was crisp and cool. The motel looked even more pathetic in the daylight. The paint was peeling in long, sun-baked strips. The empty pool was littered with dead leaves and a single, child-sized shoe. He walked the perimeter of the L-shaped building. The back was a wasteland of discarded junk, a rusted-out washing machine, stacks of bald tires, a mattress spilling its yellowed guts. There were no other roads, no other buildings. Just the highway in front, and the desert in all other directions. He saw a glint of metal near the dumpster. He walked over. It was a small, silver earring shaped like a crescent moon. He picked it up. His blood ran cold. He recognized it from the photo in his file. It belonged to Sarah, the girl he was searching for. She had been here. The thought was a spike of ice in his gut. She had signed the book. She had stayed in one of these rooms. His search was over. A new, more desperate mission had begun. He was no longer just stranded. He was an investigator at a crime scene where the perpetrators were still serving breakfast. He returned to the front of the motel. The office door was open. He could hear the low murmur of a television. He peered through the dusty window. Maud was sitting behind the counter, knitting. Waylon was slumped in a chair, his eyes glazed over, watching a grainy black-and-white movie on a small, portable television. The scene was domestic, mundane. It was utterly terrifying. Marcus needed to test the boundaries. He walked toward the highway, his steps measured. He reached the edge of the gravel lot where the cracked asphalt of the road began. He put one foot on the highway. Nothing happened. He took another step. The air grew thick, heavy, like wading through water. A wave of intense nausea rolled over him. The sound of the world faded, replaced by a high-pitched whine in his ears. The desert landscape warped, the horizon bending as if seen through a cheap glass bottle. He stumbled back onto the motel property. The sensation vanished instantly. The air was clear. The world was stable. It was a cage, not of bars but of some unseen, unnatural fence. He was trapped. Defeated for the moment, he turned his attention back to the motel itself. He needed to explore, to map the terrain. He saw the ice machine at the corner of the building, a hulking, rusted box. Next to it was a vending machine, its glass front clouded with grime. He walked toward it. The selection was bizarre. A row of stale-looking chips, a row of melted chocolate bars, and then a row of personal items. A man's wallet thick with water-damaged cards, a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, one lens cracked. A child's worn teddy bear, missing an eye. It was a display case of lost lives. As he stared at the grim collection, a movement caught his eye. A man was standing by the ice machine. He wore a faded red bellhop uniform and a small pillbox hat. He was thin and pale, his face etched with a permanent expression of anxiety. It was the face from the mirror. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice startlingly loud. The bellhop turned. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a film strip with missing frames. His eyes met Marcus's. They were wide with a frantic, desperate energy. He opened his mouth to speak. "GG get." The word came out as a scratch, a sound like a needle dragging across a vinyl record. His image flickered, a transparent shimmer against the rust of the ice machine. "Out, BB before. Before." "Before what?" Marcus took a step closer. The bellhop's form convulsed. His jaw worked, but only static came out. A low, crackling hiss. He raised a trembling hand and pointed not at Marcus but at the office. His finger wavered. Then he pointed toward the padlocked room 13. "CHCH check. In," he sputtered, the words tearing themselves from his throat. "Permanent." His form dissolved. He did not fade. He simply ceased to be there, the space he occupied once again just empty air in front of a rusted machine. Marcus stared, his mind struggling to process what he had seen. A ghost. A real, communicating ghost. His world, once governed by logic and psychology, had fractured. He felt a new kind of fear. Not the primal fear of Wayland's physical threat or the intellectual dread of his confinement. This was a deeper, colder horror. The rules were not just strange, they were fundamentally broken. He spent the rest of the morning observing. He saw other figures. A teenage girl with soaking wet hair sat on the edge of the empty pool, her bare feet kicking at the air. A man in a cheap suit paced by the vending machine, endlessly trying to open a sample case that remained stubbornly shut. They were loops, echoes of moments trapped in time. They never interacted with him. They were part of the scenery, part of the curse. Only the bellhop, Chet, had tried to break through. Lunchtime arrived. Marcus had not eaten since the day before. Hunger gnawed at him. He had no choice but to face Maud again. He walked into the office. Wayland was gone. Maud was still knitting, the rhythmic click of her needles the only sound. "Feeling refreshed, I hope?" she asked, her eyes not leaving her work. "I need to make a call. It's an emergency," Marcus said, his tone flat. "I told you, dear, the lines are down." "Then I need to leave. I'll walk to the next town." Maud finally looked up. Her serene smile was back in place, but her eyes were cold, hard pebbles. "I do not think that is a wise idea. The sun is so unforgiving, and you have not settled your bill. You told me not to worry about it until morning." "And now it is morning," she said sweetly. "Room plus a special inconvenience fee for last-minute guests, let's say $500. The amount was absurd. "I don't have that much cash." "A shame. Well, we can work something out. Wayland always has chores that need doing. You seem like a man with strong hands." This was the game. Indentured servitude until they decided to make him a permanent guest. Marcus's mind raced. He had to change the dynamic. He had to use his skills. He was a deprogrammer. Maud was a cult leader of two, ruling a congregation of the dead. "Where is Sarah?" he asked. The name dropped into the quiet room like a stone. Maud's knitting needles paused. For the first time her smile faltered just for a second. "I do not know anyone by that name." "She had an earring," Marcus pressed on, his voice low and steady. "A silver crescent moon. I found it by the dumpster. She was here. Her name is in your book." Maud placed her knitting in her lap. She folded her hands on the counter. The placid mask was gone. What looked out from her eyes was ancient and possessive. Some guests are untidy. They leave things behind. They check out and they move on. "I don't think she checked out." "You are a very curious man," Maud said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Curiosity is a heavy burden to carry in a place like this. It can wear a person down to the bone." The office door creaked open. Waylon lumbered in, carrying a burlap sack over his shoulder. It was leaking something dark and wet onto the floor. He dropped the sack with a heavy thud. The smell of copper and rot filled the air. "Coyotes got one of the generators again," he grunted, wiping a greasy hand on his overalls. He glared at Marcus. "He's still here." "Mr. Cole and I were just discussing his bill," Maud said, her pleasant tone returning as if it had never left. Waylon took a step toward Marcus. "Pay up or work, Ma's rules." Marcus held his ground, his eyes locked on Maud. He could see the structure now. Maud was the brain, the manipulator. Waylon was the muscle, the enforcer. And the motel itself was their weapon. But they feared something. He remembered Waylon's strange reverence for Room 13. He remembered the bellhop's frantic pointing. The padlocked door was the key. It was a piece on the board that did not belong to them. "I'll work," Marcus said. Waylon let out a short, ugly laugh. Maud's needles began to click again. "A wise decision," she purred. "Waylon will find something for you to do, something to keep you busy." Marcus backed out of the office. He had bought himself time. But he knew his first task was not whatever chore Waylon devised. His first task was to find out what was behind the door to Room 13. He had a feeling it was the only thing in this whole, God-forsaken place that Maud and Waylon did not completely control. It was his only hope of finding an answer, and his only chance at leveraging his way out of hell. Chapter 3. The Ledger of Echoes. Waylon's idea of a chore was Sisyphean torment. He led Marcus to the empty swimming pool. In the deep end, a thick layer of brown, dead leaves had collected over the years, mulched by the occasional rain into a solid, damp carpet. "Clean it," Waylon grunted, gesturing with his thumb. He tossed a rusty bucket and a snow shovel at Marcus's feet. All of it by hand. Then he was gone, retreating to the shade of the office porch where he sat in a rocking chair, watching. A silent, immense guard, Marcus climbed down the pool ladder. The bottom was stained and cracked. The air in the deep end was still and smelled of decay. He began to work. The shovel scraped against the concrete. The leaves were heavier than they looked, compacted and wet. Each shovelful was a strain on his back. The sun climbed higher, beating down into the white-painted bowl. This was the game. Wear him down. Exhaust him physically, bake him in the sun, break his will. Marcus understood the technique. He had seen cults do it with sleep deprivation and repetitive tasks. He set a steady pace, conserving his energy. His mind, however, was not on the leaves. It was on the motel's system. Every cult has a core belief, a source of power. Here, the power seemed to emanate from the motel itself. But the family, Maud and Waylon, were just the caretakers. They were priests of a strange religion, and every religion has a holy of holies, a forbidden place. Room 13. He worked for hours. Waylon watched, rocking slowly. Maud remained in the office. The other ghosts made their appearances. The girl with the wet hair appeared on the diving board above him, her sad eyes watching him work. Her presence was a cold patch in the searing heat. The salesman paced by the vending machine, his desperation a low hum in the air. They were decorations, trapped souls used as wallpaper. Late in the afternoon, as his muscles screamed and his skin burned, Chet the bellhop flickered into existence at the edge of the pool. He was more translucent this time, harder to see in the harsh daylight. Listen, his voice crackled, a whisper of static. The book is the anchor. The guest book, Marcus whispered back, not stopping his work. Waylon was watching. Chet nodded, a jerky, spastic motion. She binds you with the name, your story. He raised a trembling hand, pointing again toward the office. The ledger is the lock, your story is the key. He dissolved into the shimmering heat. Marcus continued to shovel leaves, his mind racing. The book is the anchor. The ledger is the lock. It was cryptic, but it was a real clue. Signing his name had done more than register him as a guest. It had woven him into the fabric of this place. He finished the pool just before sunset. A mountain of rotting leaves sat on the concrete. His body ached with a profound, deep-seated pain. He was covered in sweat and grime. Waylon grunted from the porch. "Get the hose, wash it down." Marcus complied. He found a coiled hose by the side of the building and sprayed the pool floor, washing the remaining dirt toward the drain. As the water hit the far wall of the deep end, it revealed something. Scratches in the concrete hidden by the grime. He moved closer, the spray of the hose washing the marks clean. They were names. Dozens of them, gouged into the wall with something sharp. Sarah L. Chetw. Arthur P. Penelope M. A list of the damned. Sarah's name was fresh, the letters sharp and white against the stained concrete. Chet's was there. Arthur Pym, the salesman. Penelope Penny, the girl who played jacks with bones. This pool was not just empty. It was a memorial, a tombstone. When he was done, Waylon inspected his work with a critical eye, then jerked his head toward the office. "Ma wants ya." Marcus walked into the office. The air was cool. Maud sat at a small table away from the counter, a large, leather-bound book open before her. It was not the guest book. This one was older, thicker, a ledger. "You have worked hard today, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "A strong work ethic is so admirable." She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit." Marcus sat. The ledger was filled with Maud's elegant, looping script. It was a record of accounts, but the entries were not in dollars and cents. They were names. Next to each name was a date, and then a long, detailed paragraph. He could see his own name at the bottom of the page. The The space next to it was blank. "Every house needs its books in order," Maud said, tracing a line with a perfectly manicured finger. "Every guest has an account that must be settled." "What is this book?" Marcus asked. "A history, a collection of stories. Our guests arrive, they stay, and they leave a little something of themselves behind." Her eyes met his. They were dark, ancient pools. Their stories become part of the place. It is how the Midway sustains itself. "The ledger is the lock. Your story is the key." Chet's words echoed in his head. Maud was not just killing people. She was harvesting them. She wrote their final chapter, their story of terror and despair, and that story became a brick in the motel's foundation, anchoring their souls to the property. His own entry was waiting to be written. "Sarah's story must have been an interesting one," Marcus said, testing her. Maud's smile was thin and sharp. "A frightened little thing. She ran from some foolish men who claimed they were saving her. She thought she had found a refuge here. In a way, she did. A permanent one. She was very loud at the end. That makes for a powerful story." The casual cruelty of it, the detached pride, solidified Marcus's resolve. This was not just about survival anymore. It was about justice. "I am tired," he said, forcing his body to slump, his voice to sound defeated. "I need to rest." Maud studied him for a moment, her head tilted. "Of course, dear. You have earned it. Go to your room. We will find another task for you in the morning." He stood and walked out of the office, feeling her eyes on his back the entire way. He did not go to his room. He walked around the side of the building into the growing darkness. He found a discarded piece of rebar in the junk pile, about a foot long, heavy and solid. He needed a weapon. He needed a key. He needed to get into room 13. He waited in the shadows, watching the office. He saw Maud close the ledger. She did not put it away. She carried it with her into the back room where she and Waylon lived. The book was always with her. It was her source of control. Later, as full night fell, he saw the ritual again. Maud emerged from the office. She carried a small, chipped saucer with a few crackers on it. She walked to room 13. She did not unlock it. She placed the saucer on the ground before the heavy, padlocked door. She bowed her head for a moment, then turned and walked back to the office, locking herself in for the night. It was an offering, a tribute. She was not just a warden of the entity inside. She was a worshipper. She feared it, but she also fed it, placated it. Marcus knew his window of opportunity would be small. He had to create a diversion, something big enough to draw both Maud and Waylon out and keep them occupied. His eyes fell on the old propane tank that supplied the motel's water heater. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form. He could not fight them on their terms. He could not win their game of psychological attrition. He had to kick over the game board. He had to knock on the one door they were too afraid to open themselves. He crept toward his room, the piece of rebar clutched in his hand. Tonight he would stop being a guest. He would become a burglar. And he would pray that whatever was inside room 13 was something he could reason with, or at least something that hated Maud more than it would hate him. Chapter 4. The Turn of a Corroded Pin. The desert night was a blanket of profound blackness, the stars sharp, cold points of light. The motel's sign was the only moon casting its lurid, buzzing glow. Marcus crouched behind the hulking, rusted ice machine, the rebar a cold, heavy weight in his hand. He had watched the office for an hour. The lights were out. The rocking chair on the porch was still. His plan was crude, born of desperation. The diversion had to be loud, and it had to be far enough from room 13 to give him time. He crept along the back of the building, his feet silent on the packed dirt. He reached the large, white propane tank. Its side was cool to the touch. The main valve was a large, spoked wheel, rusted but movable. He took a deep breath. He put his hands on the wheel and turned. It resisted, groaning in protest. He put his shoulder into it, gritting his teeth. Metal scraped against metal. A hiss began, faint at first, then growing louder. The smell of propane, a sickly sweet odor of rotten eggs, filled the air. He did not open it all the way, just enough. He took a book of matches from his pocket, a habit from a life he no longer recognized, and placed it on the ground near the valve, with one matchstick propped against the open cover. He moved quickly back to the front of the motel, melting into the shadows near the corner of the building that housed room 12 and the forbidden door. He waited. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. This was the point of no return. He found a small, sharp-edged rock. He took aim at the light bulb illuminating the office porch. He threw it. The rock sailed through the air and struck the bulb with a sharp pop. The porch was plunged into darkness. A moment later, the office door flew open. Waylon stood silhouetted against the dim light from within. "What the hell was that?" he bellowed into the night. "What is it, dear?" Maud's calm voice followed. Sounded like a gunshot. "Bulbs out." Waylon stepped off the porch, his head scanning the darkness. His eyes were not accustomed to the gloom. This was his chance. Marcus sprinted from his hiding spot, his worn shoes making almost no sound on the concrete walkway. He ran past his own room, past room 11, room 12. He reached the heavy, dark wood of room 13. The iron padlock was a black smudge in the neon glow. He pulled a small, metal tool from his pocket. It was a tension wrench and a pick, the last remnants of a misguided hobby from his youth. He had never been very good at it. He had never tried to open a lock while his life depended on it. He inserted the wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applying gentle pressure. He slid the pick in above it. The smell of propane was stronger now, a constant reminder of his ticking clock. He probed the inside of the lock, searching for the pins. His hands were slick with sweat. The pick slipped. Behind him, he heard Waylon grumbling. "Probably just a damn rock, kids." "Check the grounds," Maud commanded. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the night. She was not convinced. Marcus's blood ran cold. He could hear Waylon's heavy footsteps on the gravel, moving away from the office, toward the far end of the lot. He had seconds. He found the first pin, he pushed it up. A faint click. His heart leaped. He moved to the second pin. It was stubborn. He adjusted the tension. The metal scraped. Nothing. "Smell that." Waylon's voice was closer now. He was circling the building. Marcus's hands shook. He was out of time. He abandoned the pick, desperation taking over. He jammed the pointed end of the rebar into the shackle of the padlock and leaned on it, using the hasp as a fulcrum. He put all his weight into it. The metal groaned. His muscles screamed. The rebar began to bend. A loud clang echoed through the motel grounds as the rebar slipped, striking the wooden door. "What was that?" Waylon shouted. He was close, so close. "Waylon!" Maud's voice was a shriek, high and thin with sudden panic. "The tank, the tank!" Marcus heard Waylon's footsteps change direction, pounding now, running toward the back of the motel. He had bought himself a few more moments. He wedged the rebar back in place and pulled. A sharp, loud snap echoed in the night. The padlock's shackle broke. It fell to the concrete with a heavy clatter. He ripped the broken lock and the hasp from the door. There was no knob, only a keyhole. He fumbled with his picks again, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. He could hear shouting from the back of the building. The lock on the door was old, simpler than the padlock. The first pin clicked, the second, the third. A final, loud clunk as the bolt slid free. He pushed. The heavy door swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, opening into a square of perfect, absolute blackness. No light from the motel sign penetrated it. It was a hole cut into the world. He did not hesitate. He scrambled inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. It closed with a soft, final thud, and the world vanished. He was adrift in a sea of non-sensation. The blackness was total, a pressure on his eyeballs. The silence was absolute, a weight in his ears. There was no smell, no temperature. It was not a room, it was a void. He stood frozen, his hand still on the door. He tried to find the knob to open it again, a surge of pure animal panic rising in his chest. There was no knob on the inside, no lock, just a smooth, flat surface. He was trapped. He had traded one prison for another. He took a step forward, his foot meeting a solid floor. He took another. He was in a space, but his senses gave him no information about it. He felt a vibration begin, not in the floor, but inside his own skull. A low, subaudible hum. It grew in intensity, a static charge that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Geometric patterns, sharp and complex, bloomed behind his eyelids. Words, alien and meaningless, scrolled through his consciousness. He was not hearing or seeing them. They were being written directly onto his mind. Then the hum coalesced. It became a voice. It was not a sound. It was a pure, conceptual thought implanted directly into his brain. It was cold, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. A new variable, unexpected. A single point of light appeared in the center of the void. It did not illuminate anything. It was just a presence, a focus point in the endless dark. The light expanded, not with a flash, but with a slow, deliberate bloom, revealing the source. It sat in a simple, straight-backed wooden chair. At first, Marcus thought it was a mannequin, a piece of abstract art. It was humanoid in shape, slender and androgynous. Its entire body was a smooth, unbroken surface, the color and texture of polished, unglazed porcelain. It had no eyes, no mouth, no features of any kind, just a blank, ovoid slate where a face should be. It wore no clothes. It was a thing of pure, terrifying simplicity. It did not move. It did not breathe. But Marcus felt its full, undivided attention on him. The caretaker grows careless. the thought voice stated. She allows pests into the larder. Marcus's own voice felt like a crude, clumsy tool. Who? What are you? I am the terms of the agreement. I am the anchor of this place. The caretaker calls me the pallid compact. Maud, she works for you. She made a bargain, the entity corrected. A transaction was proposed and accepted. She wished for a life insulated from the decay of time, a property that would provide for her. I granted this. In exchange, she provides sustenance, the emotional resonance of a terminated contract, the final, potent despair of a life concluded. The cold, transactional language was more horrifying than any monstrous roar. This being did not kill out of malice or hunger. It was a cosmic accountant balancing a ledger. You are not like the others, the pallid compact observed. You do not feel like sustenance. You feel like a competitor. You analyze, you seek leverage. You have broken the rules of the current agreement. Outside the room, Marcus heard a muffled, furious scream. It was Maud. She knew where he was. They're going to kill me, Marcus said, the words stark in the mental silence. That is the most probable outcome, the entity agreed. The caretaker is very protective of her position. A furious pounding began on the door. Heavy, rhythmic blows, Waylon trying to break it down. The heavy wood shuddered, but it held. However, the pallid compact continued, its thought voice cutting through the physical noise. All contracts can be renegotiated. The current caretaker has become inefficient, complacent. Perhaps a new management is in order. The entity showed him an image in his mind, not a picture but a full sensory experience. He was standing in the office. The ledger was in his hands. Maud and Waylon were gone, not dead, but simply erased as if they had never been. The ghosts were quiet, at peace. Sarah's spirit walked out of the motel, free, dissolving into the dawn. He felt a sense of power, of control. He was the master of the Midway. I can provide you with the means to remove the current caretakers, the pallid compact offered. I can grant you dominion over this place. You will be its master. You can set the others free. The pounding on the door grew more frantic. A splintering sound echoed. They were breaking through. What's the price? Marcus asked, his mind reeling. The price is the position itself, the entity replied. The property must have a caretaker. A contract must be in place. The ledger must be maintained. The house must be fed. The deal was simple, horrifyingly simple. Save the souls of the past by damning the souls of the future. Become the monster to destroy the monster. The caretaker is almost through the door, the pallid compact stated, a cold, final observation. A decision is required, Marcus Cole. Propose your terms. Chapter 5. A new entry in the ledger. The wood of the door screamed. A long, jagged crack appeared, a lightning bolt in the darkness, admitting a sliver of the motel's foul neon light. Through the crack, Marcus could see a single, wild eye. Waylon's eye, filled with a homicidal rage. The offer is finite, the pallid compact's thought voice stated, calm and unhurried amidst the chaos. The integrity of my sanctum is about to be compromised. Marcus's mind, a machine trained to deconstruct flawed logic and false belief systems, went into overdrive. He was not negotiating for his life. He was negotiating for his soul. A direct refusal meant death. Accepting the original terms meant damnation. He needed a third way. He needed a loophole. A new contract, Marcus projected back, focusing his thoughts, shaping them into words the entity would understand. I accept the position of caretaker. A feeling of cold satisfaction, the closest thing to an emotion he had felt from the entity, washed through his mind. The terms are accept. But with new terms, Marcus interrupted. The contract must be amended. The pounding stopped. Through the crack he could see Waylon looking back, confused, toward Maud. A silence fell, thick with tension. Amendments are unusual, the pallid compact replied. The existing paradigm is efficient. Specify the proposed changes. The nature of the sustenance, Marcus thought, his words precise. You feed on the emotional resonance of a terminated contract. Despair, terror, correct. Correct, it is a potent energy source. I propose a new source, Marcus said. A different kind of resonance. Not the termination of a contract, but the fulfillment of one. Not despair, but justice. There was a long pause. The entity was considering it. The silence was so profound that Marcus could hear his own blood roaring in his ears. Explain, the entity finally commanded. This place is a trap for the innocent, Marcus projected. I will change it. The Midway Motel will no longer be a haven for the lost. It will become a destination for the wicked. I will lure them here, murderers, abusers, those who have broken their contracts with society, those who have a debt to pay. He was walking a razor's edge. He had to frame it in the entity's transactional language. Their end will not be simple terror, he continued. It will be a reckoning. They will be forced to confront their crimes. The spirits you hold here will not be passive decorations. They will be the instruments of that justice. Chet, Penny, Sarah, all of them. They will present the bill. The emotional resonance of a guilty soul facing true, unavoidable consequence. That will be your sustenance. The energy of a debt paid in full. It will be a far richer, more complex vintage than the simple fear of a rabbit in a snare. The entity was silent for a long, terrifying moment. The air in the void grew dense, the pressure immense. Marcus felt his mind being sifted, his intentions analyzed with cold, inhuman precision. The proposal is novel, the pallid compact finally stated. The energy signature would be different, more focused, less chaotic. There is an elegance to it, a balanced ledger. A new thought formed, sharp as a shard of glass. And the current caretakers, they are the first debt to be settled. They are, Marcus affirmed, his heart turning to ice. They are the first entry under the new management. The terms are acceptable, the pallid compact declared. The contract is amended. Your authority as caretaker is established, effective immediately. The world outside the door erupted. The wood did not just break, it atomized, exploding inward in a shower of dust and splinters. Waylon stood there, a fire axe in his hand, his face a mask of fury. Behind him, Maud's face was pale, her serene mask shattered, revealing the vicious, possessive creature beneath. "You foolish little man," she hissed. "You have no idea what you have done." Waylon raised the axe, but he did not move forward. He stood frozen at the threshold, his eyes wide. He was not looking at Marcus. He was looking past him at the figure sitting in the chair. Maud saw it too. A true, guttural sound of fear escaped her lips. Marcus turned. The pallid compact was no longer just sitting. It had risen from its chair. It did not stand. It simply was. Its blank porcelain face was turned toward the open door. It raised a slender, featureless hand. The previous contract is terminated. Its voice echoed, not just in Marcus's mind, but in the room, in the air. A sound that was also a feeling, a pressure wave of pure authority. Your services are no longer required. Maud screamed, a raw animal sound. It's mine, I made the deal, this place is mine. She lunged forward, her hands like claws. She never reached the door. Halfway there she stopped, her body seizing. Her perfect silver hair began to turn gray, then white, falling out in clumps. Her skin, held smooth by decades of unnatural preservation, collapsed. Wrinkles became chasms. Her eyes sank into their sockets. She was aging a decade a second. She withered, folding in on herself like a dying flower until she was a pile of dust and floral-printed cloth on the office floor. Waylon stared at the remains of his mother, his mouth agape in a silent scream. He turned to run. He was too slow. The ghost of Chet, the bellhop, flickered into existence directly in his path. But this was not the fragmented, terrified spirit Marcus had seen before. Chet was solid, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He held a spectral luggage cart, its brass rails gleaming. "Check out time," Chet said, his voice clear and solid as a bell. He swung the cart. It passed through Waylon's body, but the big man screamed as if he had been disemboweled, a sound of spiritual agony. From the pool, the ghost of the drowned girl appeared, water streaming from her hair. From the vending machine, the salesman, his case now open, a swarm of spectral beetles pouring out. Penny was there, her bone jacks clicking like angry castanets. One by one they emerged. The burned man, the telephone lineman, dozens of spirits, their forms no longer looping echoes but focused, vengeful entities. They swarmed Waylon. He flailed, swinging the axe at foes he could not touch, each of their spectral blows causing him unimaginable pain. They dragged him, screaming, out into the neon-lit night. Marcus stepped out of room 13. The heavy door swung shut behind him, sealing itself with a sound like a tomb closing. He walked into the office. The pile of dust that was Maud stirred in the breeze from the open door. The old, thick ledger sat on the table, open to a blank page. He walked behind the counter. He saw his own reflection in the darkened television screen. He looked the same, but something was different. The world felt thinner. He was aware of the edges of things. He could feel the presence of every soul on the property, a low thrum of energy he had never felt before. He sat down at the table in Maud's chair. He picked up her pen. He looked at the blank page in the ledger. He knew what he had to do. He began to write, his handwriting neat and precise. He was no longer a deprogrammer. He was the caretaker. His first entry was not a story of terror. It was an invoice. Name Maud, date tonight, account overdue, paid in full. He closed the book. The screams outside had stopped. The motel was quiet, A new kind of quiet, a waiting quiet. He stood and walked to the front door of the office. He looked out at his new property. The neon sign buzzed. The vacancy light glowed, a steady, unwavering promise. The Midway Motel was open for business, and he was waiting for his next guest. He had a feeling he would not have to wait long. There were so many debts in the world waiting to be collected. Chapter 6: The First Collection. A month passed. The desert sun bleached the days, and the neon sign painted the nights in poison hues. The Midway Motel did not change, but Marcus Cole did. The need for sleep became a distant memory, a biological habit he no longer had to obey. Food was a matter of taste, not necessity. He could go days without eating, feeling no hunger, only a slow, hollowing emptiness that was sated by the motel's ambient energy. He had developed a routine. In the thin light of dawn, he would walk the perimeter of the property. He learned the boundaries of his cage not as a line on a map, but as a pressure in the air, a psychic membrane that hummed against his senses. He swept the office, cleared the weeds from the cracks in the parking lot, and scrubbed the rust stains from the toilets in the empty rooms. He was the caretaker in form as well as function. The work was methodical, a way to anchor himself to the physical world as his perceptions grew stranger. He could feel the spirits. They were no longer looping echoes of tragedy. They were a quiet, waiting congregation. He felt Chet's anxious energy near the ice machine, a constant, low-level static of worry. He sensed Penny's profound sadness near the hallway where she once played her grim game, a cold spot in the air that smelled of dust and bone. He learned their stories by reading Maud's ledger. He would sit for hours in the office, poring over her elegant script, each entry a miniature novel of a life cut short. He learned of Arthur Pym, the traveling salesman who, deep in debt and facing ruin, had thought a night at a cheap motel was his last chance to regroup before he was found hanging from the shower rod. He learned of the burned man, a trucker named Gus, who had fallen asleep at the wheel and woken up to a world of fire, only to be dragged from his cab by Waylon and finished with a tire iron. He read Sarah's story last. Maud had written it with a particular relish. The girl's flight from the rescue cult, her growing paranoia, her brief, blossoming hope upon finding the motel, and her final, screaming realization that she had traded one prison for a much, much worse one. Reading it, Marcus felt not grief, but a cold, clarifying rage. It was fuel. It was the justification for the deal he had made. One evening, as dusk settled, painting the desert in shades of bruised purple and soft orange, he felt a new sensation. It was a subtle vibration at the edge of his perception, a thrumming along the invisible fence of the property. It was the feeling of approach. A car was coming. He stood on the office porch watching the road. Headlights appeared, two sharp points of white in the growing dark. They grew larger, resolving into a low-slung, outrageously expensive sports car, a silver dart that seemed to suck the light from the air. It pulled into the lot, its engine a low, guttural purr that was an insult to the desert's silence. It parked, not in a designated space, but diagonally across two of them, right in front of the office. The driver's door opened. A man emerged. He was tall, dressed in a tailored linen suit that probably cost more than Marcus's old car. His hair was perfectly styled. His smile was a flash of brilliant white, and he wore a watch that caught the neon glow with a flash of gold. He moved with an easy, athletic grace, an apex predator at the top of his personal food chain. He strode to the office, pulling out a phone and glancing at its dark screen with theatrical frustration. "Can you believe it?" he said to Marcus, his voice the smooth, practiced baritone of a man used to being listened to. "Not a single bar for 50 miles. My GPS just gave up the ghost. Then the temperature light starts flashing like a fire alarm in a nightclub. Had to pull over before this thing decided to melt itself into a modern art installation." "The road can be cruel," Marcus said, echoing Maud's old line. It felt strange in his mouth. "Cruel is one word for it," the man said, looking the motel up and down. His expression was a mixture of distaste and amusement. "This place is authentic, a real slice of Americana." He extended a hand. "Julian Croft." Marcus took the hand. The man's grip was firm, confident. "Marcus, I'm the manager." As their hands touched, a jolt went through Marcus. It was not electric, it was informational. A torrent of images, feelings, and names flooded his mind. An elderly woman's face etched with worry signing away her deed. The sterile, impersonal letterhead of a shell corporation. The desperate, pleading voice on a voicemail ignored. The smell of cheap sherry and despair in a small, cluttered apartment. He saw Julian Croft's life, not as a story, but as a balance sheet of calculated cruelty. This man did not get his hands dirty. He used paper and promises as his weapons, leaving a trail of ruined lives and quiet, lonely deaths in his wake. The motel felt it too. The buzzing of the sign seemed to deepen, a hungry, expectant sound. "Well, Marcus the manager," Julian said, pulling his hand away and wiping it on his trousers. "It seems I need a room for the night, and a phone if you have one that works in this wasteland." "The room I can do," Marcus said, his voice even. "Phone lines are down, storm last month." Julian sighed dramatically. "Of course they are. Fine, one night. Just point me to the least disgusting room you have." Marcus led him into the office. He pushed the heavy guest book across the counter. "If you would." Julian picked up the pen with his fingertips, as if it were contaminated. He found a blank line and signed his name with a flamboyant, arrogant flourish. The moment the ink touched the paper, the binding was complete. Marcus felt the motel's unseen mechanisms engage, the curse shifting its focus to the new guest. The air in the room grew heavy. The sweet, cloying smell of rot which had faded since Maud's demise returned faintly. "Room 4, Marcus said, pulling the key from the board. "Right down the way." Julian snatched the key. "Let's hope the bed doesn't have a more active social life than I do." He turned and walked out, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. Marcus watched him go. He felt the spirits stir. They were not angry, they were curious, attentive. They were a panel of judges, and the defendant had just taken the stand. He closed his eyes. He did not need to give them orders. He just needed to show them. He focused on the images he had seen, the feelings he had felt. The face of the old woman, the smell of her apartment, the cold, legal language of the foreclosure notice. He projected it all outward, a silent broadcast to the other residents of the Midway. He felt their recognition. He felt their cold, collective purpose sharpen. The trial was about to begin. Inside room 4, Julian Croft tossed his jacket onto the chair. He surveyed the room with a sneer. It was a dump. The bedspread was hideous. The air smelled of dust. He went into the bathroom to splash some water on his face. The man in the mirror was handsome, successful, unbothered. He was a winner. This place was a temporary inconvenience, a story he would tell at a dinner party. He came out of the bathroom and turned on the small television set on the dresser. The screen flickered to life, showing a business news channel. A red ticker crawled along the bottom of the screen. He watched it for a moment, then frowned. The stocks were not stocks. They were names. Martha Gable. 150,000. Robert Pino minus. 150,000. Robert Pino minus. 275,000. Anna VACK. $95,000. It was a list of his greatest hits, a ledger of his victims. He blinked. The screen flickered, and now it showed the Dow Jones Industrial Average. He shook his head. Must be more tired than he thought. A knock came at the door. Julian opened it, expecting the manager. A man in a cheap, rumpled suit stood there, a hopeful, desperate smile on his face. He held a worn, leather sample case. "Good evening, sir," the man said, his voice wheezing slightly. "My name is Arthur Pym. I have a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity for a man of your obvious discernment, a ground-floor chance to secure your future." The sales pitch was eerily familiar. It was a stripped-down version of his own. "Not interested," Julian snapped and tried to close the door. Arthur's foot, clad in a scuffed shoe, blocked it. His smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. "Oh, but you must be. This is a sure thing, a guaranteed return. We just need you to sign over a few assets as collateral, a simple power of attorney. Your car, perhaps, a triviality for the returns I can promise." A chill went down Julian's spine. He pushed the door hard, slamming it shut on the salesman's foot. There was no cry of pain. Julian threw the deadbolt and leaned against the door, his heart starting to pound. This was not right. This was some kind of elaborate prank. He went to the sink to get a glass of water. He turned the knob. A thick, black, oily liquid sputtered out, smelling of filth and decay. It swirled down the drain. Then the flow changed. Small, white rectangles began to pour from the faucet, fluttering into the basin. They were stock certificates for companies that had gone bankrupt decades ago. They dissolved into a pulpy mush as they hit the wet porcelain. The phone on the bedside table rang. The sound was shrill, piercing. Julian stared at it. The manager had said the lines were down. It rang again and again. He snatched the receiver. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Mr. Croft." It was the voice of an old woman, frail and trembling, thick with tears. "It's Martha Gable. I don't understand the letter. It says I have to leave my home. But you said the investment was safe. You promised." Julian's blood turned to ice. Martha Gable had died 6 months ago. A heart attack, the day after the eviction. "You promised," the voice wept, a sound that was both on the line and somehow inside his head. "You took everything." He slammed the phone down. The room felt suddenly small, suffocating. He had to get out. He grabbed his keys and jacket and wrenched the door open. He burst out into the night, gasping for the desert air. He sprinted toward his car, the silver symbol of his power and success. He would drive away from this madhouse and never look back. He reached the car. He fumbled with the remote, the lights flashed. He pulled the handle. The door opened. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of expensive leather a small comfort. He jammed the key into the ignition. He turned it. The engine did not roar to life. It made a grinding, sickening crunch, the sound of stone grating against stone. He looked down at his hands at the steering wheel. It was no longer leather and chrome. It was gray, pitted rock. The dashboard was stone. The seats were cold, unyielding granite. He looked out the windshield. The entire car had been transformed into a solid, immovable statue of itself. Panic, pure and absolute, seized him. He scrambled out of the stone car. He was going to run. He would run down the highway until he found civilization or collapsed from exhaustion. He turned toward the road. His path was blocked. A pack of coyotes had emerged from the darkness. They were silent, gaunt creatures, their fur the color of ash. They had no eyes, just smooth, scarred skin where their eyes should be. They did not growl. They simply stood, a living wall between him and escape. He stumbled backward away from the eyeless animals, his heel catching on a crack in the concrete. He fell hard. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror, scanning the motel for some sign of sanity, some hope of rescue. He saw him, Marcus, the manager, standing on the walkway in front of the office, bathed in the pink and green glow of the neon sign. He was not looking at Julian with concern or even curiosity. His expression was calm, placid, utterly detached. It was the face of a man watching a complex but predictable chemical reaction. It was the face of a judge who had already passed sentence. In that moment, Julian Croft understood. This was not a prank. This was not a dream. This was a reckoning, and his bill had just come due. Chapter 7. Terms of Payment. "What is this place?" Julian screamed, his voice raw with terror. He scrambled to his feet, backing away from the silent, eyeless coyotes. "What do you want from me?" Marcus did not move from the walkway. He watched Julian's panic with a dispassionate stillness. The power of the motel flowed through him, a cool, steady current. He was no longer just a man. He was an extension of the place's will. "We want what is owed," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, yet it carried across the parking lot, cutting through the buzzing of the sign. "A debt is an unpaid promise. You have left many of those in your wake." "I don't know what you're talking about," Julian lied, his words tumbling out. "This is insane. You're insane." "Anna Vasek," Marcus said, the name a stone dropped into a still pond. "She considered you a friend. You convinced her to liquidate her pension. The Global Prosperity Fund you invented for her was a post office box in a country that doesn't exist." Julian paled. "How could you know that?" "Robert Pino," Marcus continued, his voice relentless. "A retired fireman. You told him his investment would put his grandchildren through college. His house was sold at auction last month. He sleeps in his car now." With each name, a new spirit flickered into view at the edge of the parking lot. Not fully formed ghosts, but impressions. The sad, confused face of a woman, the stooped, defeated shoulders of a man. They were not here for revenge. They were here as exhibits, evidence of a life of spiritual theft. And Martha Gable, Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. She trusted you. She thought you were charming. She died alone in a state-run facility, clutching a foreclosure notice you had your assistant send by courier. Julian stumbled backward, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a primal, cornered animal fear. No, please, it was just business. It is always just business to men like you, Marcus said. But every transaction has two sides. Tonight, you will experience the other side of the ledger. As he spoke the word ledger, the world shifted. The parking lot, the motel, the desert sky, it all dissolved into a gray, featureless mist. Julian found himself standing not on concrete, but on a floor of cracked linoleum. They were in a small, cluttered apartment. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, dust, and loneliness. An elderly woman, her form translucent and shimmering, sat at a small kitchen table, staring at a stack of official-looking papers, her hands trembling. It was the last memory of Martha Gable. "What is this?" Julian whispered, turning in a circle. Marcus was there, a solid figure in the spectral room. "This is the scene of the crime," Marcus said. "Not where the paper was signed, but where the hope was murdered." The spectral form of Martha Gable looked up, her eyes filled with a bottomless, heartbreaking confusion fixed on Julian. "You promised," she whispered, her voice an echo from the grave. The scene dissolved. They were back in the parking lot. But now the spirits were solid. Chet the bellhop stood by the office door. Penny, the girl with the bone jacks, sat on the porch steps, her expression ancient and serious. Arthur Pym stood beside her, his sample case now hanging open, empty. "The court is now in session," Penny said, her child's voice a jarring, solemn bell in the night. Julian laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Court, you're a bunch of spooks and a crazy hotel manager." He made a final, desperate dash, not for the road but for the office. If he could get to the phone, if he could find a weapon. Chet stepped into his path, his face no longer anxious but stern. "I am sorry, sir. That area is for staff only." Julian shoved past him, his hands passing through the bellhop's form with a feeling like plunging them into ice water and static. He burst into the office and stopped dead. The room was filled with them. The burned man stood by the counter, a silent, shimmering column of heat. The drowned girl sat on the desk, dripping phantom water that sizzled into nothingness. Dozens of others, the lost souls of the Midway, stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on him. Their faces held no malice, only a vast, weary patience. They were the jury. Marcus walked in after him, closing the door. The sound was final. "You can't do this," Julian pleaded, his eyes darting from face to face. He saw Marcus and focused on him, the only solid, living thing he could appeal to. "Listen to me. I'm rich. I have accounts, access codes. I can make you a wealthy man. Whatever you want, it's yours. Just let me go." He was trying to make a deal, the only way he knew how to solve a problem. Marcus almost smiled. The irony was exquisite. "Your currency is not accepted here," he said. Your assets have been liquidated. Payment is due, in kind. What does that mean? Julian whispered, his body trembling. It means you will feel what they felt, Marcus stated. He gestured to the spectral jury. The loss, the helplessness, the terror of having everything you built, everything you are, stripped away by a smiling predator. The ghost of Arthur Pym stepped forward. He reached a translucent hand toward Julian's wrist, toward the gold watch. As his fingers passed through it, the watch began to corrode. The gold tarnished, turned black and flaked away. The crystal cracked. The hand spun wildly and then stopped. In seconds, it was a lump of rust and ruin which fell from Julian's wrist and clattered to the floor. Julian screamed and clutched his arm. He looked at his clothes. The fine linen of his suit was fraying, the threads unraveling. The color faded. The fabric became coarse, tattered. He was dressed in rags. He ran to the small mirror behind the counter. The face that stared back was not his own. It was gaunt, aged, hollow-eyed. His perfect hair was thin and gray. His skin was sallow, wrinkled, defeated. He saw the face of Robert Pino, sleeping in his car. He saw the despair of Martha Gable in a cold, uncaring institution. He saw himself as his victims saw themselves in their final days. He collapsed to the floor, sobbing. The charisma was gone. The arrogance was a memory. He was a hollowed-out shell, stripped of everything he had used to define himself. The judgment was complete. "Please," he wept, looking up at Marcus. Just kill me." Marcus looked down at the broken man. He felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just the quiet hum of a cosmic equation being balanced. He had made a promise to the motel, to the pallid compact. The ledger had to be maintained. "Death is not the payment," Marcus said softly. "It is merely the receipt." He turned and walked away, leaving Julian to the silent, waiting jury. He did not need to see what happened next. He did not need to hear it. He stepped out of the office and back into the cool desert night. The eyeless coyotes were gone. The stone car was gone. The parking lot was empty, as if Julian Croft had never been there. Marcus walked to the deep end of the swimming pool. He looked down at the concrete wall. A new name had been scratched into the surface, the letters fresh and sharp. Julian C. He returned to the office. The ghosts were gone. The room was empty and quiet. He sat at the table and opened the heavy ledger. He picked up the pen. He could feel the energy of the night's events coalescing, flowing into the motel, a rich, satisfying current. The pallid compact had been fed. He began to write, the words flowing easily. He told the story of Julian Croft, not the story of his death, but the story of his life, his crimes, and his final, terrible accounting. The act of writing was a final, binding ritual, turning a soul into a story into a permanent brick in the foundation of the Midway. When he was finished, he closed the book. He looked at the long list of Maud's victims. Their names felt different now. Not just a list of the dead, but a roster of witnesses. He had not saved them, but he had given them a purpose. He had given them a voice. He stood and looked out the office window. The vacancy sign buzzed, its pink and green light a steady, patient beacon in the infinite darkness. The motel was quiet again, sated, waiting. Marcus Cole, the caretaker, waited with it. His work was done for now, but he knew with an absolute and chilling certainty that the road was long, and the world was full of travelers who had debts to pay. Chapter 8. The Honey and the Vinegar. For 3 months, the motel was quiet. The energy from Julian Croft's reckoning sustained the place, a low, satisfying hum in the psychic background. Marcus fell into a deeper rhythm with his new existence. He no longer thought of it as a curse, but as a function. He was a component in a strange and terrible machine, a regulator on a valve that siphoned evil from the world. He spent his time maintaining the physical structure of the motel and studying the spiritual one. He learned to communicate with the spirits, not with words, but with shared feelings and images. He felt Chet's lingering anxiety and learned it came from a life of trying to please an unforgiving father, a pattern that had made him the perfect, helpless victim for Maud's manipulations. He understood Penny's silent sorrow was not for herself, but for the parents she had left behind, who never knew what had become of their little girl. The ghosts were no longer just a jury. They were his parish, and he was their strange, reluctant priest. His connection to the pallid compact remained distant. He felt its presence in the deep silence of room 13, a cold, vast intelligence, patient and observing. It seemed content. The vintage of Julian Croft's downfall had been potent, and the entity was satisfied. There was no pressure for a new guest, no demand for more sustenance. The motel simply waited. The next arrival came on a Tuesday afternoon, announced not by a humming vibration on the edge of the property, but by a cloud of dust on the horizon. A battered pickup truck, its blue paint faded to the color of a cloudy sky, rattled into the lot. It coughed and sputtered to a halt, and a woman climbed out of the driver's side. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a cascade of dark, tangled hair and eyes that were a startling, fierce blue. She wore a dusty t-shirt and jeans torn at the knee. From the passenger side, an older woman emerged, moving slowly and with great effort. Her face was a road map of worry, her shoulders stooped under an invisible weight. The younger woman helped her, her touch gentle but firm. They looked like a daughter and her mother. As they walked toward the office, Marcus felt nothing. No jolt of information, no sickening flood of another's sins. There was only the quiet, mundane hum of ordinary human struggle. The motel itself remained placid, its predatory senses dormant. These people were not a debt to be collected. They were simply people. The young woman pushed the office door open, the little bell thudding dully. "Hello," she called out, her voice cautious. "My mom's not feeling well. Our truck's overheating. We just need a room to rest for a few hours. Get out of the sun." Marcus stood behind the counter. "Of course," he said. The young woman's eyes, which had been scanning the dusty office, settled on him. They were sharp, intelligent, and deeply suspicious. "You got a phone that works?" "No, lines are down." Marcus recited the familiar litany. "Right," she did not seem to believe him. "How much for a room?" $20, Marcus said, pulling a number from thin air. The young woman, whose name was Maya, helped her mother, Lena, into the single chair in the office. Lena's breathing was shallow. Marcus felt a pang of something he had not felt in a long time. Sympathy. It was a foreign, almost painful sensation. "We can pay," Maya said, pulling a worn wallet from her back pocket. Marcus pushed the guest book toward her. It was a reflex. As Maya reached for the pen, a low, resonant groan echoed through the room. It was not a physical sound. It was a pressure, a deep and ancient complaint from the very foundations of the motel. The air grew cold. The sweet smell of rot returned, thick and suffocating. The spirits who had been quiet began to stir in agitation. Chet flickered in the corner of Marcus's vision, his form vibrating with distress. The motel was a predator. It did not care about good or evil. It cared about sustenance. It had been fed a rich meal of justice, but it was still, at its core, a machine built to consume despair. And these two women, vulnerable, exhausted, and frightened, were radiating a low-grade, simple despair that was beginning to awaken the old appetites. Marcus's mind raced. He had a contract with the Pallid Compact. The terms had been amended. Justice, not random suffering, was the new currency. But what if the house itself, the ancient, hungry intelligence of the place, disagreed? What if it could overrule the contract? He saw Maya's hand tremble as she held the pen over the book. He saw the fear in her eyes, not of him, but of their situation. He saw her mother, pale and sick. He saw a scenario playing out. The signing of the book, the binding of their souls, the truck breaking down for good, the slow, agonizing slide into becoming another one of Maud's stories. He could not allow it. "Stop," Marcus said, his voice sharper than he intended. Maya froze, her eyes snapping up to meet his. He reached across the counter and closed the guest book, sliding it away from her. "There's no need for that. Not for a few hours' rest." The pressure in the room lessened slightly. The groaning from the motel's core subsided to a low, unhappy murmur. "The room is on the house," Marcus said. He pulled the key for room 6 from the board. "It's clean. There's a water heater. Let your mother rest." Maya stared at him, her suspicion warring with her desperation. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Marcus said. He felt the motel's displeasure as a cold weight on his shoulders. He was defying it. He was refusing a meal. "Just be on your way before nightfall. The desert is safer in the daylight." It was the best he could do, a warning she could not possibly understand. She took the key. After a moment she nodded, "Thank you." She helped her mother up and they left the office. Marcus watched them walk to room 6 and disappear inside. He turned and faced the empty room. He could feel the motel's sullen anger. He could feel the Pallid Compact, a silent, observing presence in room 13, neither approving nor disapproving. It was simply watching to see how the new caretaker handled this unforeseen complication. An hour later, Marcus was wiping down the counter when Maya walked back into the office. She held a glass of water in her hand. "She's sleeping," Maya said. "Fever down a little, thank you, really." "You're welcome," Marcus said. She leaned against the doorframe, studying him. "What is this place?" "A motel," he answered simply. "Yeah, I get that, but it feels weird, like static electricity in the air, and you don't seem like a motel manager." Marcus met her gaze. He had a choice. He could lie, maintain the facade, or he could offer a piece of the truth. He chose the latter. "I'm not originally." "What were you before?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I helped people who were in. difficult situations, bad relationships, bad belief systems. Maya nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in her sharp eyes. Like cults. Sometimes. My mom thinks she's being followed, Maya said, her voice dropping. By a man she used to know. A long time ago, he was controlling, the charismatic type, preached about cleansing and purity. She got away from him years ago. But lately she's been getting calls. No one on the line, just a weird humming sound. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the motel. We were on our way to my aunt's place in Arizona, Maya continued, trying to put some distance between us and him. Then the truck started acting up. It's like he has the worst luck in the world following him. The vibration at the edge of the property started again. It was not the approach of a car. It was the approach of a person, on foot. Marcus looked out the window, down the long, shimmering ribbon of highway. A figure was walking toward the motel, a small, dark shape in the brilliant glare of the afternoon sun. The motel, which had been sullen and quiet, suddenly woke up. A wave of palpable, predatory excitement washed through the property. The buzzing of the sign, though it was unlit, seemed to fill the air. The spirits stirred, not with purpose, as they had for Julian Croft, but with a mindless, hungry anticipation. This was the energy it recognized. This was the kind of meal Maud used to serve. "There's someone coming," Marcus said, his voice flat. Maya looked out the window. She stiffened. The glass of water slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "Oh God," she whispered, her face ashen. "It's him, it's Brother Gideon." Chapter 9. The Shepherd and the Flock. The man called Brother Gideon approached with the unnerving, unhurried pace of someone who believes the world will wait for them. As he drew closer, Marcus could see the details. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, but he radiated a wiry, timeless energy. He had a mane of silver hair that fell to his shoulders and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were a pale, piercing blue, and they seemed to see everything and forgive nothing. He wore simple, functional clothes, a plain work shirt and dark trousers, but he carried himself with the regal bearing of a king. Marcus felt the man's sin like a physical blow. It was different from Julian Croft's calculated avarice. This was a deeper, more insidious evil, woven from strands of pride, manipulation, and a profound, chilling belief in his own righteousness. He was a shepherd who devoured his flock, convincing them it was for their own good. The motel pulsed with a greedy, ecstatic energy. It recognized him. It wanted him. Maya backed away from the window, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "How did he find us? How is that possible?" "Some people carry their own weather with them," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the approaching figure. "He brings the storm to you." He looked at Maya. "Get your mother, get in the truck, now." "But it's overheating." "It will get you far enough," Marcus said, a cold certainty in his voice. The motel's power was focused on Gideon. For a short time, its influence on the physical world would be distracted. A failing water pump might just work. A cracked seal might just hold. "Go, do not look back." Maya hesitated for only a second, then turned and ran from the office toward room 6. Brother Gideon stepped onto the gravel of the parking lot. He paused, his head tilted as if listening to a faint music. He smiled, a serene, beatific expression that did not touch his cold eyes. He was feeling the energy of the place, but he was misinterpreting it. He thought it was a sign, a confirmation of his sacred mission. Marcus stepped out of the office and stood on the porch, blocking the doorway. He planted his feet, a silent, immovable object. Gideon's gaze settled on him. The smile never wavered. "Peace be with you, my friend. I have come for what is mine. Two of my flock have strayed, a mother and a daughter. They are lost, and it is my duty to bring them back into the light." "They're not here," Marcus said. His voice was steady, a rock against which Gideon's practiced charisma would break. Gideon's eyes twinkled with false amusement. "I can feel their fear. It is a sweet perfume to the righteous. They are here. Do not stand between a shepherd and his sheep. It is not your concern." "Anyone who checks into this motel," Marcus said, feeling the truth of the words as he spoke them, "becomes my concern." From room 6, Maya emerged, helping her mother. Lena was awake, her face a mask of pure terror as she saw Gideon. They scrambled toward the battered pickup truck. Gideon's serene facade cracked. A flash of furious, possessive anger crossed his face. "Lena!" he boomed, his voice a commanding roar that had cowed hundreds of followers. "Do not turn your back on salvation. Do not choose the wasteland over paradise." Lena flinched, but Maya pulled her along, shoving her into the passenger seat. Gideon took a step forward. "I will not allow it." "You are not welcome here," Marcus said. The words were simple, but they were backed by the authority of his contract. As he spoke, the air around Gideon seemed to thicken. The motel was enforcing its new rule. Gideon was not a guest. He was an intruder. Gideon stopped, a look of confusion on his face. He felt the unseen resistance. He looked at Marcus, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "I'm the man who stands in the doorway," Marcus replied. Maya slammed the driver's side door and cranked the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught with a belch of black smoke. She threw the truck into reverse, spinning the wheel. The tires squealed on the concrete. Gideon lunged for the truck. As he did, a figure stepped into his path. It was Chet, the bellhop, his form solid and grim. "Checking out, ma'am," he said to the truck, his voice clear and strong. He tipped his hat. Gideon recoiled, a curse spitting from his lips. He had seen him. He had seen the ghost. The truck sped out of the parking lot, fishtailing onto the highway and accelerating, a diminishing cloud of dust and smoke. Gideon watched it go, his body trembling with rage. His mask of piety was gone, revealing the snarling predator beneath. He turned his furious gaze back to Marcus. "You will pay for that. You will pay in fire and blood." "The only one paying here," Marcus said, "is you." He stepped aside from the office doorway. "You came for your flock. You found a new one instead. Why don't you come inside and meet them?" Gideon hesitated, his eyes darting from Marcus to the dark doorway. He was a man accustomed to power, to being in control. But here he was off balance. The ghost, the strange resistance, the manager who spoke with unnerving authority. It was a language he did not understand. But his pride was a powerful engine. He would not be intimidated. "I fear no evil," he snarled, "for I am the righteous hand of God." He strode past Marcus and into the office. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him. The room plunged into darkness, the daylight completely cut off. A chorus of whispers filled the air, the voices of dozens of lost souls, all speaking at once. "He is not God," one whispered. "He is a liar," whispered another. "He is a thief," they all hissed in unison. A single light flickered on, the small black-and-white television on the counter. The screen showed a grainy image of a young woman, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a mixture of adoration and terror. "You told me my family was a cage, Brother Gideon," the image on the screen spoke, her voice trembling. "You told me to break free, to give you everything I had. You told me it was for the good of the flock." The image changed, a teenage boy, his face defiant. "You told me the world was poison, that only you had the antidote. The antidote was obedience. The antidote was silence." The screen flickered, showing face after face. Men and women, young and old. The ghosts of Gideon's past, the lives he had consumed, not by killing their bodies, but by devouring their wills. Gideon stumbled backward, his hands raised as if to ward off the images. "These are lies, tests sent to tempt me." "We are not tests," the voices whispered from the darkness around him. "We are receipts." Marcus stood in the corner, unseen in the gloom. He was not directing this. He was merely an observer. This was not his judgment to pass. The motel was a place of consequences, and Gideon had brought his own jury with him, locked away in the prison of his memory. Now the motel was giving them a voice. "You are not a shepherd," the voices whispered, rising in volume, a symphony of accusation. "You are a wolf, and you have wandered into the wrong pasture." The darkness in the room deepened, coalescing around Gideon. He screamed, a long, high-pitched sound of a man whose faith had been a shield, only to find that it was made of glass and had just been shattered. He was finally seeing himself, not as the righteous hand of God, but as the source of all the pain on the screen. And that revelation was a far greater torment than any physical blow. Outside, Marcus watched the office window. It was dark, but the glass rattled in its frame. A low, keening sound leaked out, the sound of a soul being audited. He looked down the highway in the direction the truck had gone. He could no longer see it. He hoped they made it. He had kept his side of the bargain. He had protected the innocent. But he knew this incident had changed things. He had defied the motel's base nature. He had asserted his own will, his own interpretation of the contract. He could feel the pallid compact, watching from its silent room, and for the first time he felt a flicker of something from it. Not anger, not approval, something new. Interest. He had become an unexpected variable. And in a place as old and unchanging as the Midway Motel, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 10. The Caretaker's Clause. The aftermath of Brother Gideon's arrival was a profound and unsettling silence. The motel had fed, not on the simple terror of a quick, violent end, but on the slow, meticulous deconstruction of a man's soul. The energy it gave off was different, sharper, more complex, like a wine aged for 100 years. The spirits were calm, their purpose fulfilled, and they retreated into the quiet hum of the motel's background consciousness. The pallid compact remained silent in room 13, a vast, digesting presence. For weeks, Marcus felt a new level of control over the property. The unseen boundaries felt less like a cage and more like a fortress wall. He could feel the health of the buildings plumbing as a faint thrum in his bones, the slow decay of the roof shingles as a whisper in his mind. He was not just the caretaker. He was becoming the motel, and it was becoming him. This deeper connection came with a new, disturbing perception. He began to feel the world beyond his prison. It was not a sight or a sound, but a psychic awareness, a network of faint, shimmering lines stretching out over the desert. He realized he was sensing the depths of the world, the invisible threads of consequence tied to souls moving unknowingly through their lives. He could feel a violent man arguing with his wife in a town 100 miles away, a desperate politician taking a bribe in a distant city. It was a map of potential guests, a menu of future collections. He learned to tune it out. The constant whisper of the world's sins was a straight path to madness. He focused on his duties, on the physical reality of the Midway. He repaired a loose shutter on room 9. He meticulously scrubbed the mysterious, indelible stains from the floor of room 2. He maintained his routine as a bulwark against the encroaching strangeness. The next arrival was preceded by a storm. Not a physical one, but a tempest on the psychic map. Marcus felt it coming a full day before it arrived. A chaotic, jagged line of pure, malevolent intent moving fast across the desert. It felt like a bleeding wound, a nexus of violence that left a trail of psychic residue in its wake. A black muscle car, scarred and dusty, roared into the lot late one night. It killed its engine, and for a moment 2 figures just sat inside, cloaked in the car's interior darkness. The motel itself reacted with a sharp, defensive recoil. This was not a sinner to be judged. This was an active, predatory evil, something akin to its own nature. It was not prey, it was a rival. The car doors opened. A man and a woman emerged. They were young, dressed in worn leather and denim, and they moved with a twitchy, feral energy. The man was tall and gaunt, with a cruel, thin-lipped smile. The woman was small, with wild, dark eyes that darted everywhere at once. They carried nothing but the clothes on their backs and an aura of profound, casual violence. They sauntered to the office, the man's hand resting on the woman's lower back. They were not scared, not lost. They looked at the buzzing sign and the peeling paint with the amused arrogance of wolves finding a poorly guarded hen house. Marcus met them at the door. He could feel their crimes as a nauseating, discordant symphony. A string of gas station robberies escalating from threats to brutal, unnecessary beatings. A farmhouse, isolated and quiet, left silent and smoking. They killed not for gain, but for the thrill of it, the simple, ugly joy of breaking things. They were a force of pure chaos. "Need a room," the man, whose name was Dex, said. It wasn't a request. "One night," the woman Kit added, her eyes scanning the office, sizing it up. Marcus looked at them. He felt no desire to judge them, no impulse to orchestrate their downfall. He felt only a cold, reptilian instinct to protect his territory. These two were a virus. They could not be allowed to sign the book. They could not be allowed to form a connection with the motel. Their brand of chaotic evil was not sustenance. It was poison. It would corrupt the place, twisting its purpose into something mindless and ugly. "We're full," Marcus said, his voice flat. Deck laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Full? Buddy, this place looks like it hasn't been full since they invented color television. Don't lie to me." He took a step closer, his hand dropping from Kit's back and moving toward the inside of his jacket. "There are no rooms available," Marcus repeated, his body tensing. He was physically outmatched, but he was not unarmed. He had the full weight of the motel behind him. "I think you're going to find us one," Deck said, his smile turning ugly. "Or maybe we'll just take yours." As he spoke, he crossed the threshold of the office. The moment he did, the contract flared to life. Marcus's contract. The Midway Motel will no longer be a haven for the lost. It will become a destination for the wicked. Deck was wicked. He had willingly entered the trap, but he had not signed the book. He was an anomaly, a case the new rules had not anticipated. The motel, sensing a loophole, surged with its old, indiscriminate hunger. The lights in the office flickered violently. The air dropped 20 degrees. The ghosts began to manifest, not as judges, but as a mindless, spectral horde. The drowned girl appeared behind the counter, her mouth open in a silent, shrieking "Oh!" The burned man materialized in the center of the room, the heat from his form making the air warp. They were not there to enact justice. They were there to feed. Kit screamed and stumbled backward out of the office, but Deck was trapped. He stared at the manifesting spirits, his arrogant smirk replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he stammered. Marcus felt himself being pushed aside by the motel's raw power. The deal was fraying, the old instincts overwhelming the new purpose. The pallid compact was silent, observing the conflict, allowing the system to be tested. He had to make a choice. Let the motel have its way, let it tear Deck apart in a chaotic, meaningless feeding frenzy, or enforce the terms of his agreement, even if it meant protecting this monster from a fate he richly deserved. He chose the contract. "Stop!" Marcus yelled, his voice imbued with the authority of the caretaker. He focused his will not as a request but as a command. "He is not a guest. He has not signed. He is not yours to take." The spectral horde faltered. The lights stabilized. The ghosts looked from Deck to Marcus, their forms flickering with confusion. They were caught between the motel's hunger and the caretaker's command. Deck saw his chance. His disbelief was replaced by a feral cunning. He drew a pistol from his jacket. "I don't know what this freak show is, but I'm leaving." He aimed the gun at Marcus. "And you're going to stay right where you are." Outside, Kit screamed his name. "Deck, get out of there, the car won't start." The motel was not letting them go. It was a trap, whether they were official guests or not. Deck backed toward the door, his gun steady on Marcus. "This ain't over." He turned to bolt. As he did, Arthur Pym, the spectral salesman, stepped directly into his path, his face a mask of sorrowful pity. "I'm afraid our business here is concluded," he whispered. Deck fired the gun. The bullet passed harmlessly through Arthur's chest and punched a hole in the far wall. The roar of the gunshot in the small office was deafening, but Deck never heard it. The shock of seeing the bullet pass through the ghost, the final, undeniable proof that the rules of his world no longer applied, was too much for his mind. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. The ghosts turned their attention back to Marcus, a silent, expectant legion. The motel's hunger still pulsed in the air, a palpable pressure. They had been denied their meal. Marcus stood over Deck's unconscious form. He was caught in a paradox. He could not let the motel have him, but he could not let him go. The man was a cancer. To release him back into the world was a violation of his purpose. He needed a new clause in his contract, a new ruling from the silent judge in room 13. He closed his eyes, ignoring the spirits, ignoring the unconscious killer at his feet. He focused his mind inward, directing his thoughts toward the dark, quiet heart of the motel. A problem has arisen, he projected toward the pallid compact. The terms are insufficient. Some debts are not meant for collection. They are active threats. They are contaminants. What is the protocol for a poison that cannot be consumed? The response was instantaneous, cold and clear as crystal. The function of a caretaker is not only to manage the house but to protect it. Contaminants are to be neutralized. A contract is binding, but all contracts contain clauses for unforeseen circumstances. You are the caretaker, Marcus Cole. You are the clause. The meaning was terrifyingly clear. The pallid compact was granting him not just authority but agency. He was not just an enforcer of the rules. He was empowered to write them. He opened his eyes. He looked down at Deck. Then he looked at the open ledger on the table. There was only one solution. A solution that would satisfy the motel, honor his purpose, and neutralize the threat. He grabbed Deck by the collar and dragged his limp body behind the counter. He found the pen. He took Deck's limp hand, wrapped his fingers around the pen, and guided it to the guest book. With a stroke of borrowed ink, he signed the killer's name. The moment the name was written, the motel sighed in satisfaction. The hostile pressure vanished, replaced by the familiar, purposeful hum of a lawful collection. The ghosts solidified, their forms no longer chaotic but focused, their eyes turning to the unconscious man on the floor. They were a jury once more. Marcus stepped back, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had not just judged a man, he had condemned him. He had forged a signature on a contract with the devil, not for himself, but for another. He had become more than a caretaker. He had become a trap, baited with his own morality. And he had just discovered that he had the authority to spring it. The realization did not feel like a victory. It felt like the final, damning turn of a key in a lock. Chapter 11. The Echo in the Machine. Kit did not run. She stood by the dead muscle car, a tire iron gripped in her hand, and watched the office with a feral, terrified intensity. She had seen the ghosts, the flickering lights. She had heard the gunshot. She was a creature of violence and instinct, and her instincts were screaming at her that the rules of the hunt had changed. The prey had become something monstrous. Marcus walked out of the office, closing the door behind him. He left Deck to the judgment of the spirits. He did not need to witness it. He could feel it, a low, thrumming process of spiritual accounting that vibrated through the soles of his feet. He faced Kit across the cracked concrete of the lot. The neon sign cast her in a shifting, bloody light. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice a low growl. "What did you do to him?" "He's settling his account," Marcus said. "You're dead," she hissed. She lunged, swinging the tire iron in a vicious arc aimed at his head. Marcus did not flinch. He did not need to. Before the blow could land, a figure flickered into existence between them. It was the burned man, a silent, shimmering wall of heat and agony. The tire iron passed through his form. Kit screamed, not in pain, but in sheer, mind-breaking terror as a phantom heat washed over her, the psychic echo of being burned alive. She dropped the tire iron and scrambled backward, falling to the ground. She stared, her wild eyes filled with a horror that eclipsed all her ferocity. She was a killer, a predator, but her worldview was built on a foundation of brutal, physical reality. This was a violation of all she knew. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm the manager," Marcus said. He walked toward her, his footsteps the only sound in the night. He stopped a few feet away. "He signed the book. You did not. The car will start now. Leave and never come back." He was offering her a mercy he had not offered Deck. She was a killer, yes, but she had hesitated at the threshold. She had not forced the confrontation. In the brutal, binary logic of the motel, that hesitation was the only thing that separated her from her partner. She was a contaminant, but one that could still be expelled. She stared at him for a long moment, then her eyes darted to the office door. She could hear a low, muffled screaming from inside, a sound of pure, soul-shredding torment. It was Deck's voice. That was all the motivation she needed. She scrambled to her feet, crab-walked backward to the car, and fumbled her way into the driver's seat. She turned the key. The engine roared to life, loud and angry. She did not look back. She threw the car in gear and peeled out of the lot, spraying gravel, and disappeared into the desert night. Marcus watched until her tail lights vanished. He had let a killer go. He felt the weight of that decision, a cold, smooth stone in the pit of his stomach. He had protected the motel from her corrupting influence, but he had released that same influence back into the world. Was that justice? Was it a betrayal of his contract? The function of a caretaker is to protect the house. The pallid, compact's voice echoed in his memory. He had done that. The rest, it seemed, was his own burden to carry. He went back inside the office. It was empty. Deck's body was gone. The ghosts were gone. The only evidence of the recent conflict was the bullet hole in the wall and the scuff marks on the floor. He walked to the swimming pool. A new name was etched into the concrete, Deck M. He returned to the office and sat down with the ledger. He wrote Deck's story, a flat, emotionless litany of his violent crimes and his final, forced registration. As he wrote, he felt a strange, new sensation. It was a flicker of something from beyond the property line, a tiny psychic echo. He paused, focusing on it. It was Kit. He could feel her, a frantic, terrified spark, driving fast and hard, putting as many miles as possible between her and the Midway. He could feel the memory of the burned man seared into her consciousness like a brand. She would never be the same. She was broken, terrified, a wolf that had seen a dragon. Perhaps, he thought, that was its own kind of justice. He finished the entry and closed the book. The motel was sated, but Marcus felt a deep, profound unease. The incident with Deck and Kit had revealed a flaw in his new world. He had the power to judge, to condemn, even to spare. He was a gatekeeper, deciding who was fit for judgment and who was to be turned away. That was too much power for one man. He was becoming as arbitrary and absolute as Maud had been, just with a different set of criteria. He was a cult leader of one, and his only follower was himself. The next few weeks were quiet. No new guests arrived. Marcus felt the threads of the world, the distant lines of debt and consequence, but none of them led to his door. It was as if the motel, after the chaotic events, had pulled in on itself, reinforcing its boundaries. During this time, he began to explore, not the physical grounds, but the motel's deeper infrastructure. He found he could touch the consciousness of an object, feel its history. He ran his hand along the grimy glass of the vending machine and felt the lingering terror of the victims whose items were displayed inside. He touched the old cord-end plug switchboard in the back room and felt the echoes of 1,000 dead conversations, a jumble of last words and forgotten goodbyes. The motel was not just a building. It was a machine designed to capture and store emotional energy. The spirits were not just prisoners, they were part of the mechanism. The ledger was the operating system, and Room 13 was the central processing unit. One night, driven by a need to understand the system he now controlled, he stood before the heavy door of Room 13. He did not try to open it. He simply placed his palm flat against the cool, dark wood. "I need to understand the original contract," he projected, not as a request, but as a statement of necessary function. "I cannot protect the house if I do not understand its foundation." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung inward silently, revealing the familiar, absolute darkness within. He stepped inside. The door closed. He was back in the void, the silent, featureless space where the pallid compact resided. The white, porcelain figure was sitting in its chair. "The original contract is irrelevant," the entity's thought voice stated. "Your terms have superseded it." "She was here for decades," Marcus countered. "She shaped this place, her influence, her methods. They are the machine I inherited. The machine's old habits tried to override my command. I need to know why." The pallid compact was silent for a long moment. Marcus felt a sense of immense, ancient contemplation, as if a mountain were considering a pebble. "Very well," the entity conceded. "A caretaker should understand his tools." An image flooded Marcus's mind. It was not a memory. It was the memory's source code. He saw the Midway Motel in the 1930s, a failing business in the Dust Bowl, owned by a desperate, bitter woman named Maud. She was not the serene matriarch he had known, but a sharp, angry woman watching her world turn to dust. He experienced her desperation, her rage at God and the world. He felt her performing a ritual from a crumbling, leather-bound book she had inherited, a ritual she did not believe would work, a last, spiteful act of defiance against a heaven that had abandoned her. He felt the moment the pallid compact answered her call. not as a demon but as a cosmic opportunist, an entity that had been drifting, listening for the right frequency of despair. He witnessed the negotiation. She did not ask for justice or purpose. She asked for survival. She asked for a world that would not decay, a business that would never fail, a life free from the slow, grinding erosion of time. The entity granted her wish. The motel became a self-sustaining island in reality. The price was simple. It needed to be fed. Maud, a woman already brimming with resentment for the travelers who passed her by, the ones with gas in their cars and hope in their hearts, found the price easy to pay. She became a predator because she had spent her life feeling like prey. Marcus saw her first kill. A young man, a salesman, Chet. He saw how the act, the writing of his story in the ledger, anchored his spirit and fed the motel, solidifying the pact. He saw how Maud grew to enjoy her work, how her bitterness curdled into a placid, smiling sadism. She was not just a caretaker. She was the motel's first and most devoted cultist. The vision faded. Marcus was back in the void, the porcelain figure sitting before him. She shaped the vessel to her own nature, the entity stated. The machine developed a preference for her methods. A ghost in the machine. Your recent actions have been reprogramming it. This creates system instability. A ghost in the machine, Marcus repeated. He finally understood. He was not just fighting the motel's base hunger. He was fighting the lingering, psychic ghost of Maud herself, her will and her appetites embedded in the very walls of the Midway. His contract was a software patch on a corrupted, century-old operating system. The instability will continue, the pallid compact stated, unless the original code is purged. A new image appeared in Marcus's mind. It was the ledger, Maud's ledger, not the pages of her victims, but the very first page. The page where she, in her own elegant, looping script, had written the terms of the original contract. It was her signature, her binding. It was the source code. "How do I purge it?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. The pallid compact showed him the image of a single, lit match held over that first page. A contract can be terminated, the entity explained, but to erase the foundation upon which the house was built, this would have consequences. The machine would be rebooted. All parameters would be reset, including your own. The choice was laid bare. He could continue as he was, fighting a constant battle against the ghost of Maud's malice, wrestling with the motel's base instincts every time a guest arrived. Or he could burn the original contract, purge Maud's influence forever, and reboot the entire system. But a reboot meant a system reset. It meant his own contract, his own authority as caretaker, might be erased along with hers. He could be freed. Or he could be rendered powerless, just another soul trapped within the walls of the Midway. He stood in the silent, timeless void, faced with the most dangerous choice of all: to accept the devil he knew, or to risk everything on the hope of a machine that could be truly cleansed. Chapter 12. The Burning of the Book. Marcus stepped out of room 13, the silence of the void still clinging to him like a shroud. The choice presented by the pallid compact was a perfect, crystalline trap. To maintain the status quo was to live as a constant warden against the motel's and Maud's insatiable, indiscriminate hunger. It was a life sentence of vigilance. To burn the contract was to roll the dice with the universe. It could mean freedom. It could mean erasure. It could mean becoming just another ghost, a looping, tragic echo trapped in the machine he once commanded. He walked to the office. The desert night was cool and quiet. The neon sign buzzed its eternal, lonely song. He sat down at the table and pulled the heavy ledger toward him. The book felt different now. Not just a record of death, but a living document, a cursed object humming with the power of its creator. He ran his fingers over the worn leather cover. He could continue. He could be the righteous gatekeeper, the judge of the damned. He could bring men like Julian Croft and Brother Gideon to justice. It was a purpose, a grim, terrible purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. It was more than he'd had in his old life. But he remembered the faces of Maya and Lena. He remembered the feeling of the motel stirring with hunger for their simple, innocent despair. He remembered the cold weight of letting Kit go, a killer released back into the world because she did not fit the narrow parameters of his function. He was not a judge. He was a filter on a machine designed by a monster. To continue was to accept the monster's framework. He made his decision. He opened the ledger. He turned the pages past his own entries, past the decades of Maud's meticulous, cruel stories. He went all the way back to the beginning. The paper here was older, more brittle, and there it was, the first page. It was not a story. It was a statement of intent, written in a spidery, desperate hand that was nothing like Maud's later, confident script. It was a pledge, a promise made to the darkness in a moment of utter hopelessness. I, Maud, in my final need, do bind myself to this place. Let it provide. Let it endure. I will feed it. I will serve it. Let my house be a rock in the river of time, and let all who pass be the water that sustains it. Her signature at the bottom was a jagged, angry slash of ink. This was the source code, the original sin from which all the others had grown. Marcus took a deep breath. He pulled a book of matches from the drawer, the same book he had used to start the fire that led him to room 13. A circle closing. He struck a match. The flame flared to life, a small, bright point of defiance in the dusty office. He held the flame to the corner of the page. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old, dry paper caught. A thin line of orange crept along the edge, turning the paper black. As it burned, a sound filled the room. A high, keening shriek, like the sound of tearing metal and a human scream woven together. It was the ghost of Maud, the echo in the machine, fighting against its own erasure. The lights in the office exploded in a shower of sparks. The windows rattled in their frames. A furious, spectral wind tore through the room, sending papers flying. The entire motel was convulsing, the foundational code of its existence being corrupted and deleted. Marcus held the book steady, his eyes fixed on the flames. The fire spread across the page, consuming Maud's desperate pledge. The shriek rose in pitch, a sound of pure agony, and then it was cut off, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The wind died. The rattling stopped. The fire on the page consumed the last of the ink, and then, as if it had finished its task, it extinguished itself. A perfect, black rectangle of ash was all that remained of the original contract. Marcus waited. He felt empty. The constant, low-level hum of the motel's consciousness in his mind was gone. The connection he had to the spirits, the awareness of the property's boundaries, the psychic map of the world's sins, it was all gone. He was just a man again, sitting alone in a dusty, derelict motel office in the middle of the desert. He stood up, his legs unsteady. He felt a wave of exhaustion, the accumulated weight of months without sleep, crashing down on him. He stumbled to the office door and looked out. The neon sign was dark. The buzzing was gone. The oppressive, heavy atmosphere of the place had lifted. The air was just air, cool and clean, smelling of dust and creosote. He looked toward the pool. He could not see the names etched on the wall. He could not feel the presence of Chet by the ice machine or Penny on the porch. He was blind again. He was alone. Was he free? He walked to the edge of the property, to the line where the gravel met the asphalt of the highway. He remembered the invisible wall, the nauseating pressure that had held him here. He took a hesitant step onto the road. Nothing. He took another. The air was clear. The world was stable. The cage was gone. A laugh escaped his lips, a raw, choked sound of disbelief. It was over. He was free. He could walk away. He could leave the Midway Motel to crumble into the desert, a forgotten tombstone for a darkness that was now dead. He could walk down that highway and find a new life, or what was left of his old one. But as he stood on the road, looking back at the dark, silent motel, he felt a pull. Not the pull of a curse, but the pull of a responsibility. What had happened to the spirits? By burning the contract that bound them, had he freed them? Or had he simply disconnected them, leaving them adrift in a house with no power? He walked back to the office. He picked up the ledger. The book itself felt different, just old paper and leather now, the malevolent energy gone. He turned to a blank page and picked up the pen. He was a writer of stories. Maybe he had one left in him. He began to write, not a story of death, but a story of life. Name Chet W. Account, a life spent in fear, seeking an approval he could never earn. Debt paid by a final, brave act of defiance. Resolution released. He wrote with a focus and clarity he had never known. He was not channeling the motel's power. He was using his own, his understanding of these souls, his empathy for their pain. He was not a caretaker or a judge. He was a witness. He wrote Penny's story, Arthur Pym's, Gus the trucker. He filled page after page, not with the details of their deaths, but with the essence of their lives, their hopes, their regrets. He honored their memory, giving them the final dignity that Maud had stolen. As he finished each story, he felt a faint, gentle stirring in the air, a soft whisper of thanks, a cool touch on his shoulder, a fleeting sense of peace. One by one they were leaving. He was not commanding them. He was not releasing them. He was simply opening the door, and they were choosing to walk through it. He wrote until his hand ached, until the ink in the pen ran dry. He wrote Sarah's story. He wrote Julian Croft's. He wrote Brother Gideon. He wrote Dex. He balanced the entire, terrible ledger, not with vengeance, but with truth. When he was done, the book was full. The motel was empty. The last of the spirits, with a final, peaceful sigh that rustled the pages of the ledger, was gone. He was truly alone now. He looked at the book. His work was done. He stood up and walked out of the office, leaving the ledger open on the table. He walked past the silent rooms. He passed the empty pool. He walked toward the one door he had not yet tried. Room 13. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. It was not a void. It was just a room. An empty, dusty room containing nothing but a single, straight-backed wooden chair in the center. The pallid compact was gone. The reboot had reset everything. The connection to its dimension severed. The anchor weighed. He walked to his old room, room 7. His briefcase was still on the floor. He opened it. The files on Sarah were still there. He had found her. He had given her peace. His original mission was, in a way, complete. He picked up the briefcase and walked out of the room for the last time. He did not look back. He walked across the silent parking lot, onto the highway, and began the long walk toward the dawn that was now breaking, painting the eastern sky in hues of soft gray and hopeful pink. He did not know what he would find. A town, a car, a new life. He was just a man again. A man who had walked into hell and through a strange and terrible series of transactions had managed to close it down, pay its debts, and turn out the lights. The sun rose, warm and real, on his face. The Midway Motel, a silent, empty shell, began to shrink behind him, until it was just another ugly building in a world that was, for the first time in a very long time, blessedly, terrifyingly, and wonderfully mundane. The end.